What's more fun than celebrating the best at something, Tom? Why laughing at the worst, of course? We covered who we thought were the best players, now let's poke fun at who we think are the worst players of the Game of Thrones, what's their greatest flaws, and what's their most redeeming traits. As always, just to make sure we're singing from the same page, books or show. Same as the best players video really, books as primary, but we might use things from the show where it doesn't cause any short circuits. A quick announcement before we get going, we're looking to do a Q&A in the near future where me and Tom answer your questions. So if there's anything you want to ask, whether it's about us personally, or Thrones, or Star Wars, or any other geeky franchises, feel free to pop your questions in the comments. Or if you want to make sure that we definitely see it and definitely answer it, head on over to our Discord where we have a channel dedicated to logging viewer questions. At number 5, we have Ned Stark. Now, I know everyone probably thinks this guy should be at number 1, or at the very least much higher. I mean, it's Ned's death that provides the primary catalyst for the War of the Five Kings, and had he done things differently, he could have perhaps temporarily seized power and prevented the Lions from getting even more of a foothold over the realm. But the reason I put Ned down here is because Ned just barely, by the skin of his teeth, qualifies as a player of the game. He places his piece on the board by reluctantly accepting He Who Cannot Be Named's request to be Hand of the King, ergo making him a player on the game board, but after that, it's not really fair to say that he's a bad player. It's more accurate to say he just straight up refused to play. However, as the Lady of Betrayal puts it so beautifully,
apathy is death.
And thus, his refusal to play still warrants him a spot on this list. Ned was aware of the rules, and the moves he could make to advance his position and also undermine other players. But one of his strongest traits prevented him from doing so, which leads perfectly into what is Ned's biggest flaw as a player. I mean, do I really have to say it, Tom? Even Hodor could tell you what it is, and that guy can only say one word. Ned's sense of honor. We love Ned over here at the Fandome, but he is the... I'm not saying it, Tom, you'll only splice in my mispronunciation. Anyway, Ned is a person or thing that is a perfect example of a particular quality or type. Epitome, in this case, the phrase honorable fool. He believes in the infallibility of the rule of law and that morality and honor should always be upheld, even if it's getting in the way of accomplishing a goal or could lead to further strife down the line. I mean, his honor got him killed. Enough said, really. And Ned's most redeeming trait as a player? His intelligence. Ned is not stupid, not by a long shot. He may have refused to play the game proper, but that doesn't mean he didn't make wise and smart decisions. With the self-imposed restrictions of honor and mercy holding him back, Ned made the smartest and most sensible moves that his moral code would allow for. And were it not for the fact that he had unwittingly put his trust into one of the best players of the game period, he might have been able to pull off his plan. At least temporarily. Just saying, don't dunk on Ned too hard. He's a brilliant leader, both politically and militarily. I mean, look at how loved and respected he is in the North. He's clearly good at leadership. It's just he plays by a set of rules everyone else refuses to follow, which unfortunately gets him on this list. Only just though. At number 4 we have... No, Tom, I won't besmirch him. I simply won't. He is the one true king, and this is nothing short of treason. You can't make me. Come on, lads, call the banners. We have to warn... of my own free will, and certainly not under duress. Ow, I'm saying it, okay? We have Stannis the Manus Baratheon. While not as foolishly honorable as Ned, Stannis likewise plays by his own set of rules others simply will not follow. And those rules are his way or the Shadow Realm. Stannis does play the game and definitely gets shit done, and isn't out of the game yet, in the books at least. But he's always played with a self-imposed handicap that he refuses to remove, making every move he makes on the board much more difficult than it actually needs to be. As a military leader, he is bloody terrifying, but as a player on the board overall, there is something to be desired. I'm sorry, Manus, they're torturing this out of me! And Stannis' greatest flaw as a player? Timing. Yes, the one true king has terrible timing. He waited too long to declare himself for the throne, leaving room for Robb and Renly's crowning. He then spent too much time faffing at Storm's End instead of marshalling his forces and heading straight to King's Landing once Renly was out of the picture. If he had done that, then it doesn't matter if Tywin and the Roses make friends. It's too late because Joff, Cersei and Tyrion's heads are now firmly on spikes atop the Red Keep. It was Stannis who told Jon Arryn of Joffrey's parentage, yet once Jon had fallen sick and died and big bro Bobby B decided to go north to find a new hand of the king, Stannis sulked off to Dragonstone to amass the royal fleet and his forces. Now some say Stannis' big flaw as a player is that he's too set in his ways, which to a degree he is, but oftentimes if a good argument is presented, he can be swayed, as seen by his decision to go north to save the wall and win the Northern Lords over, putting the horse firmly back in front of the cart, so to speak. And Stannis' most redeeming trait as a player? Unyielding resolve. Tywin and Stannis are both in fact cut from the same cloth, which is why they both have the same strength as a player of the game. They both resolve to see their goals through, and neither would ever be willing to admit defeat and give up. There's only one differentiator that sets apart the good player from the bad one, and that's morals. Stannis, whether you think he's a good guy or not, does have somewhat of a moral code, and there are things he won't do, at least up until D&D ran out of books. However, nothing is off the table for Tywin when it comes to morality. I think this is why Tywin was so afraid of Stannis. It was basically like looking into a just and uncompromising mirror, and knowing that just like him, Stannis would resolve to find solutions to his problems, but without compromising his morals, which when you actually think about what that entails, is fucking terrifying. Stannis won't just beat you, he'll beat you his way. Scary stuff. Like Ned, Stannis only barely makes the list. He's really not as inept as people think. Please forgive me, my king. Tom made me do it. On to our next pick. At number 3, it's the young wolf Robb Stark, and by extension Catelyn Stark also. Robb doesn't get any leniency like his father, as he full well tries to play the game in earnest. He crowns himself, well, it's more fair to say his bannermen crown him king, and he tries his hand at diplomacy and makes moves that firmly class him as a player of the game. I know some people will blame much of Robb's game fails on Cat, and some will say it's all Robb's fault and Cat actually made most of the good decisions, and on and on and on, but here at the Fandome, we think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Both Robb and Cat make some wise decisions on the game board, and both make some doozies. Robb executes Rickard Karstark, cutting his already depleted army down even further when he needs it most. Not to mention he breaks his oath to the Freys. Kat isn't innocent either though, she lets Jaime go. That move was monumentally detrimental to Robb's cause. Having Jaime as a hostage could have prevented the Red Wedding full stop, as Jaime is the most valuable bargaining chip you could possess where Tywin is concerned. They both fucked up in places they couldn't afford to, and neither can be given 100% of the blame. So let's just say they both suck, okay? And Robb's greatest flaw as a player? Like father, like son. And also emotions. While not quite as perfect as dear old dad, I mean he does break an oath at the end of the day, even if he breaks it to protect another person's honor, Robb still held to his father's ideals of honor and justice, and just like with dear old dad holding himself to these standards, it ended up fucking him over. Robb and Kat also let their emotions ruin their plans. Robb's depression at hearing about Bran and Rickon's death left him to find comfort in Jane. Literally, he really needed to keep those pesky emotions and hormones in check. Ditching Jane to maintain the integrity of his political alliance, forgiving Rickard of his war crimes to maintain his army, killing or simply leveraging the threat of killing Jaime to provoke Tywin into a reckless wrath are all moves that a player could make that would advance them further along the game board. But such moves require honor and feelings to be left at the wayside, something Robb just couldn't do. And it doesn't help that he's still just a boy despite the tantrums he throws to tell you otherwise. Honor is a fool's prize in Westeros, make no mistake. But allowing your emotions to get the better of you in this deadly game is an even faster way to lose your head. As for Kat, her greatest weakness was her motherly instincts. They weren't always a detriment, let's be fair, but in the times when they were, they really did cost Robb in the long run, and took away his get-out-of-jail-free card, which left him high and dry when he made his own mistakes. Robb's story's so depressing. Let's talk about some positive aspects. What is Robb's most redeeming trait as a player? Boldness. Rob may not have been a political maestro when it came to plotting and scheming, but make no mistake, the young wolf wasn't a slouch in leadership and knew how to send a message and assert his position on the game board. He didn't cower, he didn't apathetically sit around stewing on what to do, and he didn't beg for peace or kiss Joffrey's arse. He called his banners, mobilized an army, and showed Tywin what happens when you try to push the North around. His moves were bold, and were it not for one broken oath and that twat Balon, he may just have hung in there. It never got to that point because Tywin is just too damn good at the seedier aspects of the game. But if Rob had managed to avoid the Red Wedding and forced Tywin to come to the table for peace talks, Tywin would have been faced with a player that he would have struggled to bully or shove around. Rob would not have stood for Tywin's shit, and the peace terms would have definitely been favourable for the North. At least until Tywin figured out a clandestine way of getting his vengeance. And Kat's most redeeming trait, she understood the value of alliances. Not once, not twice, but 3 times she tries to expand Rob's pool of allies to help bolster his war effort, with one attempt actually succeeding, as in the books the Freys actually commit a rather decent chunk of forces to Rob's army. In the early rounds of the war, Rob leaned on Kat's knowledge of the various lords and how to best proceed. She suggested Roose command the army at the Green Fork over a more bloodthirsty Greatjon, who would have loved a good old scrap and possibly gotten more of that army killed and fallen into Tywin's trap. Kat was essentially the equivalent of a Wikipedia for Rob, and it served him well. Rest in peace, forever our king in the north. But you and your mother did suck at playing the game. Sorry. On to our number 2 pick, and it's Balon the dumbass Greyjoy. I mean, what's left to dunk on this guy for, Tom, that we haven't already covered in our worst military commanders and our How the Greyjoys Could Have Won videos? The guy is fucking useless as a military and political leader, and we're really just beating a dead horse at this point. But I understand why he absolutely has to be on this list. So let's just cover his biggest flaw and his most redeeming traits as a player of the game. And Balon's biggest weakness as a player? The Bellend doesn't understand the value of allies. Make some friends, you grey-haired fuck! Your power and position is too weak to play solo, and anyone in your position with a speck of wisdom would realize that. Stop trying to solo the realm, you antisocial misanthropic wanker, and play nice with some of the other kids. And Balon's most redeeming trait as a player? Patience. Like with the Commanders video, the sole redeeming trait of Balon as both a military leader and a player of the Game of Thrones is his ability to hold back his bitterness and bide his time. I'm sorry this is repetition of the Commanders video, but patience is his sole positive quality. Everywhere else, he is nothing short of moronic. And we've made it to our number 1 pick, and the worst player of the game for our money is this evil bitch right here. Cersei has no excuse. The other players on this list all made the list because they have codes of morals and honor and conduct that, regardless of if they are self-imposed or not, handicap their ability to take advantage of the more ruthless, clandestine, and crafty options one can employ in the game. Cersei has no such restrictions, and she still fucks everything up. Not to mention, she starts from such a strong position of power that just with some basic level-headed competence, she could have staved off advances from the best players of the game through sheer overwhelming advantage of her position on the board. She's basically the Yang to Olenna's Yin, or maybe it's more accurate to describe her as competence antimatter. She's egotistical and narcissistic and overestimates her abilities as a player by a wide margin, with delusions that she's her father's superior when it comes to cunning and intelligence. This could be somewhat offset by having some decent low cunning and basic understanding of the do's and don'ts of the game, like Tyrion. But Cersei has neither. What she does have, however, is a great flaw as a player, and that flaw is... she is petty as fuck. Cersei does not understand the concept of keeping your friends close but your enemies closer. She refuses to move with the ebb and flow of other players, especially the absolute powerhouses that are the Roses, and cannot bear to see a perceived slight go unpunished. You know, basically textbook self-destructive narcissistic behavior. She often acts on impulse and is a slave to her emotions, which makes her one of those detestable people that is happy to cut off their nose to spite their face. Combined with her thinking only only one move ahead mentality, it makes her one of the most volatile and destructive pieces on the game board, lacking all sense of mastery and making her a monumental liability to any pieces close by. Her plans consistently backfire, and with every misfire she slowly but surely erodes away the power, prestige, and accomplishments of one of the best to play the game, period. Poor Tywin, having your legacy shit on by the utter stupidity of your offspring. I feel like there's a lesson in there for Tywin somewhere. She doesn't understand that the Game of Thrones is likened to a game of chess, and to be adept at the game, you have to think several moves ahead at the minimum, even if it comes at the expense of petty revenge and quick gains. And Cersei's most redeeming trait as a player? Are you fucking kidding me? Book Cersei is a moron, and she's screwed. Show Cersei? Well, after that initial blip with the Faith, she's a lean, mean, killing machine. She wipes out House Tyrell, allies herself with Euron, wipes out a bunch of Dany's fleet, avenges Marcella, and is responsible for getting poor Rhaegal killed. Then, let's not forget that she duped Dany and the North and let them get pasted by the Army of the Dead, all while sipping some good old Arbor Red at the capital. By the end of it, Tom was legit rooting for the mad bitch because she was having a killer time while everyone else was sat around crying and moping. I guess that just goes to show how wrong D&D got it, eh? As always with these vids and our number one pick, can you guys name a single redeeming trait for Book Cersei as a player of the game? The most insightful or belly laugh inducing comment will get the pin as usual. There were some really awesome suggestions for Varys, so much so that I wish you could do multiple pins, honestly. I can't wait to hear what defenses you can provide for Cersei as one of the worst players to have ever graced the board.